What would you do if you discovered one of your biggest clients, accounting for 40% of your revenue, was using a project of yours to illegally funnel money to people? This is precisely what happened to Jonty Fisher and his advertising agency. What unfolded was a brutal period of cutbacks and rebuilding as Jonty and his partners worked to save their business and rebuild. As a classically trained business marketing strategist, Jonty has led strategic thinking and guided executional work across brands such as HEINEKEN, PepsiCo, Jack Daniels, Adidas Originals, Kia Motors, Hennessy, and many, many more world-class brands. He is driven by a passion for human beings and all their gifts and quirks, and a deep curiosity for learning lessons out of everything he does. In this week's episode, he shares his incredible story as we discuss how imposter syndrome affected his leadership, how he learned to bring his whole self to work with him, and exactly what happens to your business when a client commits an illegal act unbeknownst to you in the middle. My name is Nick Haralambis, and I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. So remember, it's not over until it's over. Okay, welcome back to It's Not Over. I am sitting with an old friend of mine. He is old, and a friend of mine that is old. Just kidding, Jonty Fisher. Hey, I mean, we can't use lack of hair as an age gauge because we both have lack of hair. If you're listening to this and not watching, Jonty and I are rocking the same hairstyle. Jonty, thank you and welcome. How are you?
Very good, Nick. Great to be here. Lovely to chat to you again.
Awesome, ditto. I'm excited about this story. You're another agency person that we've had, following on from Rob Stokes, who we both know well too. So let's dive in, and why don't you tell me about the business that we're going to be talking about and set the scene, and let's go from there.
Cool. So it probably it goes back to university. I started an agency with a business partner at the time, a guy called Dean McCoubry, when I was still finishing up my business science degree. And then when we finished that, we started a little agency called Traffic, which was we started out of his apartment in Kenilworth and then moved across to the heady heights of Gardens. We were in what we called the Dungeon, which was underneath Global Culvert Pace, which was one of the big agencies at the time. And we were right at the bottom of that building, and we had this kind of this window which we could open because we couldn't afford any aircon, and we had a printer next door. And they would dump their ink out the window there into this little channel between our two places. So it wasn't exactly the glory days of advertising for us, but we started out there and grew that business for quite a while. Actually, that business we grew for about a decade. Those early days had lots of wins, lots of good times. Had a lot of fun. Had some meetings that I'll never forget for the rest of my life, just how bad they were. But really kind of paid our dues, I suppose. I think one of the joys of being young is that people just generally don't say no to you. So we really just built our business by saying yes to everything that we could possibly do for a client, and then phoning up the biggest person we could, whether it was independent newspapers at the time, and just phone up the sales director and say, hey, we're a couple of young guys and we're launching an agency and we need to learn about all the stuff. And everybody would end up giving you time. And we kind of built our business like that, just really, I suppose, as a couple of charlatans in a very established game and just trying to learn our way in the trenches. And we grew that up till about 35 people in the first decade. And then we rebuilt that with the help of a guy called Mark Sherrington, who was a bit of a mentor at the time. And we launched a new agency then called Bletchley Park, and brought in a new partner there as well. Had a lot of fun in that agency. And then, about 5 years ago now, we merged that with Old Friends Young Talent. And I exited that business about 2 years ago, and I'm now at Publicis Group. We'll talk about probably some of those early days of Traffic, I'm sure. And Bletchley Park, I think, was when we had some of our best moments, but also hit a big wall. And that was a big kind of liberating moment for me in my own development, I think, and my own leadership. And I think I was a very different person before and after that. So hence why I thought it'd be a good one to talk about.
Amazing. Okay, so a couple of questions just right off the bat in the early days of Traffic. First off, why? Why did you start an ad agency?
Yeah.
Of all the things in all the world, why an ad agency?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I was always interested in communications. I actually wanted to be a journalist, actually, of all things. I think it came from being a child of the 90s when I was, well, let me say, a high school child of the 90s.
Yeah, careful.
So yeah, kid of the 70s, but effectively, like, coming of age was very much around the Gulf War, and I think that was the first, 24-hour news stream war, and I was absolutely glued to that thing. And Christiane Amanpour at the time was like an absolute hero or heroine for me at the time, and that's what I wanted to be, was Christiane Amanpour. So I then went and did a 3-day work shadow at the Cape Times, and it very quickly told me this is the last place in the world I ever want to be. So a couple of following the court reporters for a couple of days, I was like, nah, this is not me. So I went and did one of those aptitude things, and it was like communications, so journalism first, and then marketing. So I went into business science and absolutely fell in love with the marketing game. And I think in my final year there, my honors year, I think I really started to figure out that we were really being groomed to go and work for, one of the big guys. You're groomed to go and work at a Unilever or on P&G or something like that. And it just never grabbed me, to be honest. Rob and I have shared the story as well, but I was in a business, we had a business, business strategy course, and Mark Shuttleworth spoke at that, and the one thing he said that really stuck with me at the time was, because I was trying to figure out what was next, and he said, look, you've got this kind of window. This was 1999, and he said, you've got this kind of window of like 5 years where if you want to start something, everything's for you. South Africa had gone through that kind of initial early, like, 5 years of the post-apartheid existence, and all the government policies were behind entrepreneurs, and I think that was like one of the last pushes that I need to kind of go, yeah, maybe I should just go on my own. And I'd met what became my business partner, a guy called Dean McCubry. He was British, came out from the UK, and just fell in love with Cape Town, and a girl who was a friend of mine as well. And so we kind of headed off, and we started working together, as I said, in that final year, and then decided to make a full go of it. But I think it was just born out of the fact that I never felt cut out for the corporate life then, and that was kind of I never felt it was like a really big decision, that it was like I kind of weighed up all the odds and kind of felt like I just fell into it, which maybe just, I suppose, signals that it was a natural move for me. But it never felt like, some people will look back and go, oh, that was a brave choice or something like that. It just felt like an obvious choice to me at the time, to be honest.
Okay, that makes sense. And at the time, did you figure yourself as the creative part of this agency or the operations? Like, what were your skills?
I mean, I was definitely the business guy, and the strategy guy. Dean was much more of a creative type of personality, and we kind of, you have roles in a partnership, and we definitely fell into those roles. So I was like a bit more of the kind of structure guy, and certainly the strategy guy in terms of dealing with clients. And Dean was very much the creative engine. And I think in many ways, if I had to look at those early years, I think I almost played the role of almost sometimes the handbrake. Dean was the guy who pushed me, and I was the one who kind of was, okay, cool, but then how are we going to actually do this practically? So there was a lot of that. So I mean, I certainly got a lot out of Dean in terms of him pushing me into things that I might not have done, taking risks that I might not have done, all those types of things, especially when I was, very young. And I probably gave him the structure that he needed to build out a business as well. So, yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting the way that you describe the traffic decade was quite quick. And I suppose looking back on it, it feels quite quick. So tell me what it was like building an agency. Apartheid's just ended and everything is different, and you're building this incredibly creative business with someone you kind of like. And you got up to 35 people, profitable, sustainable. Like, what was that like?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'd say, it was a lot of fun. Like I think the joy of dealing with any business where you're just using people's brains effectively is that technically, and this is very technically, every transaction should be a profit transaction, right? So you're not having big investment costs and those. So we were completely skint. We were living off the bones of our asses, but we were having a hell of a lot of fun. We weren't paying ourselves really anything. Everything was going into salaries and client lunches and all the things that we thought we had to do. My two overwhelming memories of that thing were just that it was a hell of a lot of fun. And then when if I look back on it, I think in my own leadership, there was probably a lot of imposter syndrome in that time as well. I'd come straight out of university, never gone to work in a big agency. So I always thought, they must be doing it so much better than we do and all of those types of things. And I think for myself as well, Dean was always, very good creator, very good communicator. He was the guy who was out there on the forefront, and I almost assumed the role of being more of like the rock of the business, the guy who would like control the money and all of those things. And I think I was really playing a role for a lot of that time. Like how should an MD be dressed? How should an MD act? All those types of things. And I certainly don't feel, when I look back on it, I think one of the big lessons in one of the first walls we hit was around actually myself and how do I bring my whole self to work and what's the value in that versus, and really kind of shedding these clothes of what I expected people needed me to be as opposed to what I really could bring to a leadership role. So yeah, but back to your question, I think it was just a lot of fun. We were learning so much, which is a massive thing for me. If I'm not learning, I'm dead, and I get really bored quickly if I'm not learning. And I think I was immensely driven by that. So it was this kind of really validating thing. We grew well. We kind of, we didn't have too many, we obviously were skint the whole time, but we didn't have too many like life-threatening moments up in that, and that's very lucky because in a game like advertising, you're never generally more than like two phone calls away from death. So we were lucky in that time. We were lucky to get a couple of bedrock clients early, and that really helped us. So yeah, it was growing, learning, getting some great people around us, and feeding off that energy, and really just loving the game. I suppose, as I said, there was like a little bit of a dark side of it in terms of the imposter side of it, which I had to kind of grow out of. But yeah, it was an immensely rewarding time. It was just super fun is what I really
Amazing.
Remember about it.
So I'm going to pick up on the imposter syndrome later on in the show, but I want to dive now into this near-death business experience. Kind of tee it up for us. What is going on in the business at this time, and what's the conflict?
Yeah. So, as I said, everything had grown really steadily, and we were up to, 30, 35 people at that stage. We had these beautiful offices in Greenpoint. We were just relaunching from this other business into this new business. And we had all this kind of massive excitement for the future. And we had landed this kind of, in our minds, whale of a client, which I'm not going to mention for reasons that'll become obvious, but it was in the financial services industry, and we had won the business, taken it over from another partner, and we had taken over effectively this is like a decade in. This is like 2010, 2011, and we'd taken over a research process and a partner that the previous partner had worked with. So we had to kind of take on this relationship and manage this work. And what ended up we found when we kind of hit this wall was in 2011, the industry regulator came knocking on our door saying, well, this work that you guys have been doing, this research work, is actually a way to funnel money, that this client was funneling money to a whole lot of people that was against industry regulations. And so we were stuck in the middle of this thing, unbeknownst to us. And it was, you were kind of suddenly, it's almost like an age of innocence is just broken, and I and my partner and the way we run the business was very, very high in integrity. So you are now in the situation where, you, number one, your integrity has been brought into question, and that was obviously personally a massive thing. But most importantly, this whale was 40% of our revenue. So not so much, this research thing was a small piece of the pie. We were doing all the communication work, and it was it wasn't a hard decision to part ways with them, obviously, but the repercussions of it were massive, and I think it was just a really brutal time when you've had this almost like kind of coddled growth experience up into like some decent success as a bunch of young guys, and you're suddenly confronted with this big punch in the face. So I suppose that's the tee up of what happened.
That is so many questions just on the tee up. The main one that I'm curious about is, were they intentionally funneling this money? Was it actually an illegal act?
Yeah, absolutely. So they
Wow.
in their minds, they were getting around regulations, right? Which is not the way the industry regulators saw it. But in their minds, they thought this was entirely defendable because they had put like a whole lot of lines in place, and they were legitimately doing some research and blah blah blah. But yeah, I mean that's obviously not the way that the regulator saw it. So I suspect that there was some nefarious players around some of the people that we were dealing with, that maybe they were a bit, Pornish in it as well, but who knows? But certainly, we felt it was a massive betrayal, and that everybody knew about it. But with a bit of hindsight, I think a lot of it was 100% intentional. But I think some people believed, maybe drank the Kool-Aid and thought that this was absolutely fine.
Okay, and to be clear, your response as the leader of the business was to basically fire the client, and then what?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean that was the issue. I mean, we were left with just probably 20% of our costs were then left on retainer. So we were in a really precarious decision, but yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we had to obviously act really fast. So and in our business, that's people, right? We don't really have any kind of widgets to sell besides people. So we had to lose a bunch of people really fast, and we did that in the most kind of respectful, I suppose, humane way that we could. But ultimately, that was probably the hardest thing, because we'd built this kind of family dynamic, which you kind of tend to do when you've built with a bunch of people, built something and they've been there for a long time, and then you've got to kind of break that family up. And that was a big kind of emotional learning for me around leadership and around, it's kind of, I think so much of entrepreneurship, or so much of business really, when a crisis hits, is around that kind of classic trolley problem, like, are you going to let 5 people die, or are you going to kill the one person to save 5 people? And I think a lot of the times it was kind of getting my head around that. But the first job really was to obviously right size. And the next job was ultimately to get the remaining people to hold their belief. And I think, I often say that hope is the currency of entrepreneurship, that optimism and that hope that you've got to give to people and yourself a lot of the time is really the currency of how you can turn that hope into success. So I think we had a lot of like really open, vulnerable conversations. Transparency was everything in that time. And that was, I was somebody who was used to kind of being the person together with my partner, obviously, of kind of having everything under control. And I really took that as a personal failure almost, which I think now is not a smart way to look at it. But at the time, that's how I felt. I kind of really beat myself up about it and really wanted to try and find a way through this that I could kind of hold it within myself and my partner and not let anybody else know and all those types of things. But I mean, ultimately, we understood that really kind of being vulnerable around that was the only way to do it, and to really share that, and to actually bring everybody into our confidence, I think, which had a whole lot of benefits. And one of the things that we had that really helped us, I mean, there were a few things that helped us, but one of them was that we actually had a life coach in our business. So we actually employed a life coach, which we used as like a corporate coach in our business, full-time, half days, but full-time. And that was, geez, you talk about when some of those decisions, that kind of can sound weird at the time, but when they really, really, really help you in those kind of moments. And that was immensely helpful, because I think, I as I said, I was somebody that prided themselves of feeling like I had everything under control, and I was just completely out of control at that time. I was battling with my own kind of embarrassment about the situation, and embarrassed about my integrity being brought into question, embarrassed that we hadn't seen this, and embarrassed that we were going to have conversations about letting people go. And I had a lot of good people around me at that time who could, the coach being one of them, but friends and those that really kind of helped me through the integrity question. I think that was a big thing.
And were you completely honest with the people around you? I mean, oftentimes, especially when it comes to legal ramifications, you shut down, you lock down, you kind of don't tell anybody in case. My default is to be open, vulnerable, and transparent, because I've learned the hard, shitty lesson that the more you hold on to yourself, the harder it is to deal with. So did you, I want to be very specific here. You got an email from a lawyer who was like, you guys are in breach and you're going to jail. And then you did what?
Yeah, completely. And
what was the first thing?
Exactly. I mean, it's a great question, because I think you'll know what probably the answer is. My initial response, at that time was just put my head in the sand and run as far as I can. Like it was so outside of the realms of possibility, and so attacking, to kind of core values, that it was a brutal thing. I mean, I remember almost the courage that I needed to speak to my wife about it. Just because
I was just going to ask you.
And I think Kara was the first person, besides obviously my partner, that I did speak about it. But it took a huge amount, and it was a really, really hard, brutal conversation, because of how it made me feel. I think that embarrassment and that shame and that all of those things are going like, how did we not see this? How did this happen? What does this say about me? All of those things. And obviously I'd invested 10 years in this thing, now it's looking like it's hitting a wall. And I think
just on that feeling of embarrassment, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you look back at it now, Jonty, the leader now, if you had to be in that position, would you really feel embarrassed now?
No.
It was a youthful response, right?
Yeah, and it was I know now a lot about things that are in my control and things that aren't, and I'm really clear on focusing on things that are in my control and being responsible, but pushing away things that are outside of my control. And I think this was a classic example. If I had to look back on that now and say, what was in my control in that situation? If I'd been super sharp and really asked a gazillion questions all the way down the line, I could have figured it out. But where I was at the time, what the kind of relationship we had with that client, and all the kind of massive scope of the work that we were doing, I wouldn't be embarrassed. I'd just be pissed off,
Angry. Yeah, angry. Okay, so then you get the email, you talk to your wife, you talk to your business partners, you guys decide that the best route forward is to get rid of the client. And then I want to ask you about the first conversation you have with your team.
So I mean, I think we did take a while to talk to the team, because we felt that we needed to have answers. Again, now I think I would be immediately more open, but at the time I really felt like we needed to have a plan. Otherwise we were just going to lose everyone, and so also at the same time, so we made the decision to part ways, but we had we knew that we didn't end up actually going into a legal process, but we suspected that we would need to. So we needed to get a whole lot of stuff down. So we together with our lawyers, we kind of we played for, I don't know, it was probably about 3 weeks or so. We played with the client, getting a whole lot of stuff down in writing, just so that we had a legal trail behind us on that. But so we had a couple of weeks really where we could kind of figure out what was next and how we would act. And then that first, I mean, I think I went to maybe as in that 3 weeks, I was in crisis mode personally. And was in kind of shutdown mode on everything, so everybody could see that there was some shit going on. I mean, there was no doubt about that. But I think that's where I went deep in with this coach, and together with my partner and my new partner at the time, which was also quite a difficult conversation, and really just kind of dove headlong into it. And we did a lot of work around kind of there's a framework around kind of a victim framework, when you don't have information, you're not empowered, and a lot of work around that and realizing where I was in that and how I could empower myself through information and through sharing, and get myself out of that kind of dark hole. So by the time that couple of weeks had passed, and I kind of felt like at least I could see through it. I could see on the other side. The initial pain of it, I suppose, had given rise to a bit of a cool. Let's take stock. Let's look at what our cash flow is like. Let's see what kind of arsenal we've got to play with here, and what calls we need to make quickly after that. And so we didn't have a clear plan, but we had enough of a plan. And I think, I was kind of wrestling with this whole thing around family as well, and keeping this group together, which is, again, a very naive leadership view, but it was where we were at the time after having built that. And I kind of had got to a phase, again, working with this coach, where I could see that to save the business, I needed to kind of break this family scenario. And so I was I certainly wasn't ready for that conversation, but to be honest, if I'm dead honest, I don't remember a lot about it, because I was probably still in a massive amount of kind of turmoil and shock and all of those things. But we just had to pull the plaster and share where we were. What I remember more is actually what happened after that, which I think was, there was obviously for actually the year and two after that, it pushed me into a massive leadership journey after that. And it was actually a massively liberating event, in my business life, as hard as it was at the time. But in the immediate aftermath of that, what I do remember is, what you forget, right, is you've got all these amazing people around you, like really smart people that are really committed to this business. And just being able to share it, you kind of engaged all of these people. So of course there were some people who reacted badly to it and went running to the door. Very few, but some did, and that's fine. But the majority of people were like, cool, how do we help? Let's help us think through this and help us, this is what we'll drive, this is what we can pick up, let's think about this, maybe we could do this, and you kind of forget in that moment, when you are thinking it's all on you, that you've actually, by sharing, you disengage all of these amazing people. And it turned into such a flywheel of kind of that vulnerability turned into all of these people working for us, their own commitment and investment doubled down into this business. And that led to more growth and certainly almost like a reset of how we all work together. And so it was an immensely powerful moment, both for the business and for me, but also just, I think, in that realization of when you really do pull a bunch of people together, not around a client or a business problem, but actually around the business.
A crisis.
That was immensely powerful as well. So, I think I certainly remember it being a really tough conversation, but I don't remember much about the actual conversation, to be honest.
I mean, I feel stressed listening to you talk about this, if I'm honest. I'm going to push you on something that I've been battling with for a while with a couple of my coaching clients that I help in their businesses. Do you still believe in building a family dynamic in a business?
So I mean, it's a great question, because I think it comes to the heart of it. So for me, I think, what is a family, right? It's about really strong relationships, and it's about relationships where hopefully you succeed and fail together. You feel empowered to be able to fail, but still keep your role in that unit. It's supportive. It's hopefully the space that's a safe space for you. It's hopefully the space where you can have conversations that you wouldn't have necessarily with somebody that you didn't feel that close to. All those types of things. And the way I think about it is, it's about taking that element from the family, but not the fact that it's unbreakable. It's that part that's unhealthy in a family view on a business where you've got to keep that team together at all costs. And if you've got a toxic auntie or uncle, you can't get rid of them. If you're in a business, yes, you can, because that you don't have to sit around the dinner table with that person, because they're going to piss everybody else off. You can get rid of them, you know. So I think what I take of it is what the social construct and the power of the social construct of a family relationship and what that gives to the unit is the power in the family metaphor, but it's not the unbreakable, you know, your family is, you can't, you know, you can choose your friends and not your family. It's not that. You can certainly choose who's in your business and who's not. And you can get rid of people when they're not right, or they don't uphold those values, which is different, you know, in a family.
At the time, you had been building this business off the back of a family dynamic. Did anybody throw that back in your face at the time when this was all unfolding?
I think sometimes it's in your own heads, you know, like because there were lots of people, right? There were lots of employees that came and went in our business that were like, cool, yeah, hey, I'm here, but I'm just kind of collecting my paycheck, and after 2 years, I'm like, yeah, cool, I'm going to go somewhere else. You know, they're not thinking about it like a family dynamic, you know. So the people that were bought in, they loved the culture, loved the environment, loved a lot of that things. But I think it was a lot on me, to be honest, rather than it was my view of what I wanted to do in corralling these people together. And it was my own shit to work through rather than our employees, I think. I mean, nobody ever threw that back, put it that way.
Okay, interesting.
I think it was more me.
And because of the nature of this conflict and this issue, did you worry about or receive any backlash from the industry, from the market? Did you suffer any reputational damage? Like, surely that was forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the short answer is no. It wasn't something that was like there was one article which was absolutely mortifying to me that it was anything was in the press where the agency name was mentioned, but that was it. And I think, you know, I don't know. There's an old Seneca quote, you know, we suffer more in imagination than reality. I think that was absolutely where I was, and I was mortified that that's exactly what would happen. And a friend of mine, who's a lawyer, friend of mine called Mariam Haroon, I was talking to her about trying to get some advice from her at the time, and you know, she said to me, I said to her, look, you know, the biggest thing for this is my integrity and how important that is to me, and how this kind of pulls away from that and my personal reputation. And she said, look, everybody that knows you knows your integrity. Everybody that loves you, that's really close to you, knows that. And this is not going to change that because they know who you are, you know. And I think that was an immensely, just the fact that I remember that conversation today means that it was an immensely powerful thing for me in moving through that, you know. But no, I mean, we were, you know, it never ended up going like into court or anything like that. The regulator never ended up pursuing it into its final form. So yeah, I think we kind of got away with it. But I mean, it was certainly at the time, it felt like the most mortifying thing in the world.
Of course. I can't even imagine, like, as you're about to scale and grow. Let's talk about that scale and growth, right? What did the business suffer as a result of this? In percentages, staff, revenue, where did you end up?
Yeah, so as I said, it was about 40% of our revenue. So it was a huge amount there. I mean, what the decision we had made, I mean, we had built up a pretty good cash flow position. We were both, my partner and I, were always quite conservative around, you know, what could be around the corner, and we'd built up quite a healthy cash flow position, so we could kind of weather ourselves for a little while on that. So one of the decisions we did take was to limit, you know, try and save as many people as we could, and then really back ourselves to grow thereafter. And so we dropped probably about 25% of our team. We dropped thereafter. And then just kind of lived off, you know, weaned off that cash flow position and backed ourselves to grow thereafter. And I think one of the advantages of that was that it really did pull everybody together. I mean, we used it as an opportunity to really reset everything about ourselves, you know, reset what our vision was, and we did that together as a team. Reset how we were going to get there, and what our roles were, and you know, how we were going to work together, and what our values were, and all of those things. We kind of used it as this galvanizing force to take this bunch of people, walk them through the fire, but let them feel the ownership of that on the journey with us. You know, and that paid a lot of dividends actually, and we recovered way quickly than I expected that we would. You know, by the end of that year, we certainly went back to where we were, but we had recovered into a profitable space. We were able to pay bonuses, not massive bonuses, but we were able to pay bonuses at the end of that year. And then the next year, we had a really good year. The year after that, even better. So, and we won some awards that year, and we were able to get the narrative back and to feel like we were over it, you know. But I actually think that the action of how we managed the process itself allowed us to galvanize that team towards growth, which was awesome. I mean, it's standing on the edge of an abyss is an immensely liberating thing, right? You've got nothing else that you can fail, so you just go, well, cool. Where do we go? With nothing's off the table, you end up with this real sense that anything is possible, and as long as we stick together, we'll get it done. You know, and if you've got that hope, as I said earlier, and that optimism, that's kind of what can drive you forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like a crisis to galvanize a team, and this actually is a great example of one of my favorite recent psychological discoveries called posttraumatic growth. I'm not sure if you've come across it.
No, immediately, instinctively, I'm like, I can see that.
100%. It is exactly what it says on the tin, but there's masses of studies done that people who experience trauma of any kind, up to 85% of people in these studies report being a better version of themselves after that trauma. Trauma from abuse to an accident to loss of a business, every trauma. There is actual research that shows that you are a better version of yourself after the trauma. And this is a great example of a company version of that. That you can't live life avoiding failure. You can't live life avoiding trauma. If you do, you don't become resilient. You don't build up any kind of resistance to failure. Like the quote that I keep telling people is, I've never met a successful person who's avoided failure towards their success. It's impossible. Yeah. You cannot avoid failure. And this is a great example of galvanizing a team and becoming a better version of what you were.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that rings massively true for me. And I think I certainly, you know, it's interesting. I look at that time, and I think somebody that knew me as a leader in the time before that, when I was probably a lot stiffer, a lot more kind of playing a role than what the gift that gave me was a real sense of like, just be yourself and bring your whole self to work. All of those kind of trivial statements, but that are immensely powerful in your own leadership and your own self leadership. You know, so it was incredibly powerful for me that moment in that crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't imagine it would be any other way. So there's a couple of things I want to jump back to. You mentioned your life coach was quite pivotal at this point. In the beginning, why did you have a life coach on staff?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I personally had just started a bit of an exploration, I suppose, of, you know, a classic human experience, right? You kind of hit 30 and you start going, you know, where am I going in life and all that, and you start asking a few questions of yourself. And I can't remember where we found this person, but you know, how we started engaging with her. But I think my business partner Dean was seeing her, and then her name was Shirley, and then we it must have been somewhere around there that we just thought, hey, we've got a whole lot of stuff, we've got a whole lot of interpersonal things, and we're actually interested in this, of like growing ourselves and all those things. So, you know, let's bring her in. And we brought her in, and she initially did some intervention stuff around psychometric testing and getting us looking at each other as a team. And we really enjoyed that process. And then it kind of just grew from there into like we were being more and more reliant on her. And there were some particular moments of like interpersonal crises between people that we then brought her in to help. And I think the more that we looked at it, we were like, just shit, there's so much value in this, you know, and there's so much value in having somebody's having a problem, like a personal problem at home, like that's affecting work. Let's give them an outlet, you know, like if people are having problems at work interpersonally, cool, let's give them an outlet. And it started working really well for us pre this, and obviously then, you know, really paid for itself in spades during.
Amazing. I'm interested in the idea of your mental health at the time, because back then mental health wasn't really a thing, like a focus, and especially for men, and especially for South African men in entrepreneurship. So what did this experience do in that moment to your personal life, your mental health, your relationships? Like, how did that all work?
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning, like I'm at that time, I was somebody who wanted to be seen as having everything under control. That was part of the persona of, being the younger person in my own company for the first couple of years and thinking I need to play this, like caricature almost of an MD. And I think it's just, this issue just exploded that, right? So, I mean, I immediately just went into like this deep, dark hole of like, I just don't know. I can't even comprehend how to get ourselves out of this. It wasn't like I knew exactly what to do, and I'm this like agile entrepreneur and I was just like, I almost just couldn't function. You
were fucked.
And I was like that at home. I wasn't. It was a terrible time for my wife at the time because I just wasn't communicating. I was just kind of, closed off. And I think part of, one of the advantages of this particular life coach is that she's got this incredible way of just not letting you off the hook, and she'll ask you a question and then she'll just sit back. And then you give an answer, that's the answer at the top of the iceberg, above the water. And then she'll just sit there. She won't say anything. She'll just stare at you. And then you start going, and then you go, okay, I think I'm doing it because of this. And she'll go, and she'll keep quiet. And then, so it actually, what that was really powerful in doing was teaching me how to think through something like this when it was emotion wrapped up in a practical business problem, and kind of unlocking those layers. And then I think a lot of it was giving me permission to think. And I know that sounds strange, but when you're in a dark hole, you tend to, and you're in a bit of that kind of embarrassed, shame bubble around this thing. You tend to just be beating up on yourself, and you're in a cycle of beating up on yourself. And I think what that really did was give me a lot of permission to, in quite a safe space, just kind of emerge from that cave, and give myself permission to be the victim in this, but then to start getting out of that and to be a bit more empowered. And what do I need to be empowered? What information do I need to make decisions? And she just kind of walked me out of that cave, and I think that was probably the gift of that role in helping me through that.
You've mentioned this a few times, and I wanted to pick up on it. This idea that in the beginning of your career, you were acting like a leader. You were doing what you thought a leader should do. Was this the pivotal moment where you were like, actually, I am a leader? And then did it change, or was there other stuff that impacted how you lead today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was probably on the journey, but it certainly kicked the can probably 3 years down the road. Not kicked the can. That's the opposite way.
I know what you mean, though.
Fast forwarded me there, yeah. But I think, I thought I was doing, in my 20s, I thought I was doing what was right. I was showing up like a leader, but it wasn't who I was. I wasn't leading as Jonty. I was leading as this caricature, right? And I think when I probably got into my late 20s, I definitely knew that wasn't working. And I was like, I wasn't kind of connecting with people. I was a different person at home than I was at work. I was a different person with my mates than I was at work. And that you start calling yourself on that shit, when you get into your late 20s. And so I was already on a journey of trying to figure it out. But this certainly, as I said, with the liberation of that, I think gave me the opportunity to kind of just shed all of that stuff, and be super vulnerable in that moment of going, I don't have all the stuff figured out. I need your guys' help on this journey. I'm going to be exactly who I am. I want you to be exactly who you are. Let's have absolute freedom of expression. Let's have a completely direct relationship and not, nobody talking in how they think they need to be talking to me, or I'm talking to them, or any of that stuff. So it certainly just fast forwarded all of that stuff by shedding all of that by a good couple of years. I think I probably would have got there, but it would have taken me a long time to get there. And this just gave that one, just cut everything down and start again, which was really liberating and really powerful.
Post-traumatic growth. That's
exactly
the
right.
embodiment of it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, as we close out, I'm interested in what you learned from this particular thing that you carry with you today.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things. There's probably 4 or 5 things. I think the first one is really that it's only work, right? I think I had so much wrapped up in this thing, and without really realizing that work can kill you as well. As much as we love it, it can kill you. And taking care of yourself in that moment, and really, I suppose, learning how to take care of yourself. I think that's probably one of the key things was really understanding that your own cognitive ability and emotional ability to work yourself through this type of stress is one of the things that you should be spending the most time learning. What works for you? What are your tools? What's important to you? How do you create the time for that? And to manage that. So I'm way more attentive now into how I manage and compartmentalize stress, and what my tools are and how I use them and all those things. And I think often, sometimes, and this is a hard thing for entrepreneurs, right? But I think I needed to almost realize that sometimes business had too much hold on my life. I, in my whole kind of entrepreneurial career, which is ended now, right? But it was 20 years of that. I think a lot of my mates and a lot of peers would say, geez, it must be so rad. You've got destiny control. You've got so much freedom. And that, when you're in it, doesn't necessarily feel like that, right? You actually feel way more trapped in something. Not trapped's the wrong word, but you're beholden to something, right? Every major life decision you make is predicated on another question, which is, how does this affect my business, right? You can't just go and spend a year somewhere. There's a lot of things in your life that you've got to be considering around that. And that, for some people, that's great, and they're living like that. I'm probably a bit more balanced in my worldview, and I didn't like some of that sense of it. And it gave me a freedom on that, of just understanding and being attentive to how I manage my own kind of sense of stress, and how I take care of my mental health, and what role work and the rest of my big life is, and what role work plays in that. That's kind of one big one. I think the other one, which is an old adage of just that 90% of entrepreneurship is staying alive. I mean, I think it's just staying alive long enough for that next break. It's always been something that's a big thing for me, and I think so many entrepreneurs just quit early, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just didn't work for them, and that's cool. But I think your number one role is just to make it to the next month. That's it, And if you could do that, and you can do that for long enough, you'll learn enough, you'll have enough fun to keep you going, you'll have good enough people around you to be able to, when that next opportunity does knock, you'll be able to nail it. And maybe the first one you don't, but the second one you will. So it's kind of just getting through that. I think we're not taught that, really. We generally, by media and everything else, taught the opposite. Everything's an overnight success, and success is selling out or something like that. For a lot of people, that isn't necessarily a success. Success is just being in a business you love, working with people you love, and that being profitable, and that able to sustain you and grow. And that can be enough for a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think we end up in these kind of stories of Instagram of 14 months after they started, they sold for more than the New York Times, those types of stories, which I don't know if those are really helpful. I think that's
they're the outliers. They're not the rule. That's not the rule.
It's
the rule is profitable, slow growth. That's actually the rule of entrepreneurship. So I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I back that too.
Yeah. And then I think, as we've spoken about quite a bit, I think really in my own leadership, it really taught me about just being myself 100%. And I certainly don't want to use the word authentic, but just being who I am and leading how I want to lead, not how I think I should lead, just leading how I want to lead, and really not taking on board other people's successes and how they got there, just doing it my way. I think was a huge part of this journey for me. I think another one was around, and maybe what there was a big betrayal in this, right? I think I felt certainly personally betrayed by the people that we worked with there, and that led to a great reckoning for me, because I've always lived my life giving trust to people. And that's a conscious choice. It's not an unconscious choice. It's, I choose to give people trust. I do that because I think that I believe in the power of people taking accountability for their actions and their attitudes. And sometimes that can bite you, right? In this case, it did. But I still choose to do that now, to this day. So, but it did force a bit of a reckoning for that for me. Have I been burnt here, and is that naive? And I spent probably a good year and a half kind of working through that. But I still choose to trust people. I choose to give people that trust until they break it, as opposed to the other way around. Because I think there's an optimism in that, which I'm always going to have. It's part of kind of who I am, and I do choose to see the good in people. There's I think it's a Rumi truism about like living life as if everything's rigged in your favor, something like that, which I think is that's kind of how I want to live my life as well. And for a lot of people that's naive, and a lot of people that's they can see that as being idealistic, but it's I think it's certainly served me more than it's hurt me in life, and I hold on to that. And then lastly, I think it certainly made me very conscious of the depth of stress that we carry as entrepreneurs, and being responsible for people is one thing, being responsible for families and the sense of that family beyond the business, I think was something that I took really hard out of this. Was in my current role now at Publicis, I've got lots of stress, right? But it's very hard to explain until you've kind of been in an entrepreneurial role like you have, Nick, and the weight of that, and it's like a 50-kilogram backpack that you carry on your back every single day. And because I'd never known anything else, I think I'd carried that almost unconsciously the whole way through. And that moment really forced me to kind of understand how much weight that was. And moving into this role now, I can see it even more clearly now. Like just the depth, the kind of plumb line of that stress is so big. And as entrepreneurs, we don't actually acknowledge that enough, I think. And that's, so I think that was a big thing that I took out of that moment as well, was understanding that and making sure that I can break that, making sure that I can contextualize that in a positive way rather than a negative way. Because I think it can force you to make some really bad decisions. And I needed to learn that lesson. So maybe those are some of the things that I've taken out of it.
Wow, so many incredibly useful things, Jonty. Thank you. And before I say goodbye, please tell listeners, viewers, where they can find you, follow you, and even buy from you if you've got something that you want to punt.
I've got nothing to sell besides the agencies and the Publicis group. I mean, welcome to follow me on social platforms. Generally, you've got to be interested in the outdoors to follow me, because that's my kind of my balanced passion is being in nature and trail running and a lot of that stuff. So I'm on Instagram on Jonty Fisher, and that's just a whole lot of generally trail running stuff. So if somebody's interested in that, otherwise I'm Jonty Fisher on Twitter as well. That's about it. Got no great wares to sell.
Jonty, I'm so happy to say that for you and your incredible journey, it's not over.
Exactly right.
Okay.